Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another science fiction and fantasy wrap-up. This is going to be a combination of new 2022 releases as well as a few backlist hidden gems that I personally really enjoyed. And I did notice when I was preparing this video that several of the books I'm including here are by authors that I've read before, and I thought that they had potential to be favorites, but I had to read more by those authors in order to make that call. And so it's kind of cool to circle back around, review these authors again, and some of them are definitely becoming favorites and while others are not. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk science fiction, starting with Starfish by Peter Watts, and this is a story that is set in a near future where there is this underwater rig where people go to work. However, the work is very dangerous and also very isolating, and so it doesn't tend to attract the best. It's not a highly regarded job, so instead this is work that is typically done by those that are kind of the outliers in society. So within this story, we follow a group of individuals who are pretty much either abusers or have been abused themselves, or a combination of both, and have found themselves in this job situation trying to make a living, make a life, and deal with their own baggage and past. And so the story follows an individual as they are on this rig, and within the story things happen. Honestly, for me, this book is very character driven, and obviously given that setup, you can imagine that it has tons of content warnings for abuse, cutting, and all of the surrounding topics. So if you're sensitive to that, this book may not be for you. In terms of tone, it was very, very grim, but I thought that the ideas explored within this book were very compelling. The idea of individuals trying to deal with this unfinished business and using this work in the rig to try to work through that and how they interact with each other. I thought it was very well done. The book itself also is very isolating. It has a good atmosphere. It has that element, just a slight element of underwater horror. It's definitely more science fiction, but if you're looking for that element, you will find a touch of that there. And if you're familiar with this author's name, it's probably because I constantly gush about Peter Watts' Blind Sight, which is one of my all-time favorite science fiction books. And this one is much more straightforward in terms of being science fiction horror with a larger element including vampires. And this book is fairly different from it in terms of setup, characters, plot, but what you get once again is Peter Watts' ideas, and so he really gets to explore a lot of philosophical thoughts and ideas, and I do love that aspect to the book and his writing. I've read him before in some novellas, and I just think he's a really intelligent author. I did go on to read the later three books in this series. It was intended to be a trilogy, but ended up being 4 books, like so many times with publishing. But I didn't love those other books as much. While I liked, again, the world, they have kind of a shift in tone and plot, and they just felt a little bit unwieldy. I think that the books would have been better with perhaps stronger editing, more focused narrative, all of that. And that tends to be my problem when it comes to science fiction series. I recently did a video talking about my current top 10 science fiction series, and if you watch that video, you know that I tend to really like first books in series, and then my enjoyment often drops off in the later installments. And so I don't know if anyone else relates to that, but I was hoping that this book would be a new favorite series. This is a new favorite standalone, but as a series, I don't know if I love the other books enough to call it a favorite series, if that makes sense. But highly recommend this one. It was still fantastic. Not as good as Blind Sight, but that is a hard book to beat. And next we have Spaceship Eternity by Lafferty, and this is a science fiction book that follows an individual who is a brilliant mind, someone who is able to solve mysteries and murders, and so they are constantly called upon to use their sleuthing mind to solve the mystery at hand. However, they get the opportunity to go to a sentient space station that is run by aliens, and they go there, and of course the story kind of spirals inwards. I wanted to pick up this book because I've read this author before. It was one of my first review titles I've ever picked up, and that was 6 Wakes by Lafferty, which is a closed room mystery set in space involving clones. And while it wasn't a perfect 5-star read, it was still a really strong 4 stars. I loved it a lot, and it definitely still is one of my favorite science fiction books. And so I was excited to read this other one, which once again promised to be a sci-fi mystery. However, while I like this book, I will say that I didn't find the tone of this book to be to my liking. So I went to this one hoping it would be very similar to 6 Wakes with a noir style dark mystery story, and while it does have a science fiction mystery element to it, I found that the story itself had a much lighter and sillier tone. It almost felt very absurd. The characters were very unlikable, which I would say is kind of true for 6 Wakes as well. But in this book, when it's more of a lighter, funnier story, I think we're supposed to like the characters more, or at least that's what I thought. And also in the back of the book, it kind of promises that this character is this brilliant sleuth. And so I wanted to see more of that on the page. I wanted to see them act more like a Sherlock and make smart deductions. And I felt like instead of getting to see that, we actually just were simply told that this person is really good at solving mysteries. And I wanted to see that actually played out a little bit more. So this was not quite what I expected to be. I was disappointed. In my opinion, Six Wakes is much stronger and a much different book. Next, I have HellSans, which is a book I received for review from Angry Robot Books. And this is a book that is set in a dystopian future where there is this drug that is produced and given out by the government that basically causes everyone to be happy. However, there are certain individuals that cannot take this drug or have a bad reaction to it. And so within society, there's supposed to be this class divide. And that's the basic premise that was pitched to me when I, looked up and saw the marketing material around this. So I definitely thought that this book would be right up my alley. I thought it was going to make some really great social commentary surrounding those ideas. However, when I got into this book, it was very, very different than I expected, to the point that literally as I was reading, I kept stopping and checking the back of the book and reading the material surrounding this book and just thinking that I had picked up the wrong book and had somehow made a mistake. So I will say that the book itself felt very, very different. What I got essentially was kind of an action-packed dystopian thriller narrative with some very average characters, very average plot, and I just did not find it to be very nuanced, unfortunately, after I was really hoping to have this detailed, thoughtful story that was going to add some great social commentary to my reading life. And so I will be honest, I have loved so many Angry Robot books, but I always feel like I have to be, of course, a honest reviewer to you all, and I will say this one was a huge disappointment. I did not enjoy it and really don't have a lot of redeeming qualities to say about this book, so let's just move along. And then we have a sci-fantasy book called Genesis of Misery by Neon Yang. This is a book that I received for review from Tor Books. And in the story, we follow a young woman who is on this desolate nowhere planet, and she apparently is just a no one. However, it turns out that she has these magical abilities. And because of this, she's actually potentially very important. She is somewhat of a chosen one within this galaxy, and the story spirals from there. So I picked up this book because of my love for the Tezzeret series by the same author, because these are novellas with some incredible world building, and what I loved about them, I wanted to see what they could do in a longer form, so in a novel. And I was unfortunately a little bit disappointed because of the fact that despite this being a sci-fantasy novel, I felt like the world building was very, very weak, which again was disappointing only because I knew from her previous series that she has a talent for world building that can feel very fresh and original. What this book instead focused on more was the characters, which would be fine if I felt the author was stronger in that area, but that was actually a big complaint for me with the Tezzeret series, is that the world building was incredible, but the plot and the characters were fairly weak, and those are the same criticisms I would say about this book. The downside is that, again, I felt like the world building was more in the background of the story, which was not to my taste, because again, I wanted to really see an amazing world, in which case I could kind of look past some weaker other elements and really love the story, but I found myself just not connecting with this one, not caring about the main character and her struggle, and I just didn't find it as original as I wanted to be. If you're familiar with the author's work, they tend to do some interesting things with gender fluid characters. And so once again, that was very much in the forefront of the story with some clear pronouns and conversations around that. So if you're looking for that, it is on the page. But as for the story itself, it was lacking in my taste. And now to talk fantasy, I want to talk about Against All Gods by Miles Cameron. This is a book that I also received for review from the publisher. And I love the premise of this. It's set in a world where the gods exist. And of course, for their own amusement, they tend to mess with the lives of humans. And so within the story, we follow humanity, or some individuals that decide to basically rebel against the gods and possibly try to take them down, or at least take them down a notch. And so this is a historical fantasy series that is set in somewhat of a Bronze Age fantasy. So it definitely has that historical elements to it, which is not something I read a lot, but the world building itself was very rich. So I did find myself pulled into the story. I've read this author before. I recently actually talked about reading their space opera, Artifact Space, and I enjoyed that one, but I was very interested to check out their fantasy. So while I personally tend to prefer science fiction, I actually think this particular author really shines when they're writing fantasy, because the world building in this, the characters, the story, I felt were much stronger than Artifact Space, and really shed light on things that I've heard about this author before, how rich their worlds are. I believe this is the first in either a series or a trilogy, and I would definitely read more because I thought it was a lot of fun. Again, a premise that maybe isn't the most original, but I just thought it was very well done and delivered exactly what I expected from this, which is always something that I'm looking for. And so highly recommended. I do do think it's a great place to jump in and check out this author's work. And then we have Notorious Sorcerer by Davinia Evans, and this is a book that I received for review from Orbit Books. And this is the first of, I believe, a new series that is kind of a secondary world but urban fantasy style series where we follow an individual who is kind of a low-level alchemist. So they are more of an errand boy, and they go and do work and run errands for the more upper-class, well-known alchemists. However, upon doing this, they end up accidentally doing some forbidden or supposedly impossible magic, and of course the story spirals from there. The premise of this book sounded fantastic. I went into it knowing it was going to be kind of a lighter, quirkier story, and I was just looking to have fun, so I didn't expect it to be something really epic in scale. I didn't expect it to be as dark as a lot of the fantasy I'm normally drawn to. However, I was disappointed because I just found this one to be very dry, and despite going into it with what I thought was good expectations, I just was very much let down. I thought the characters were okay. I thought the plot was okay. I've heard other people gush that the magic system is amazing. I thought it was okay. And I've also heard this book compared to books that people who love Dungeons and Dragons, which I do, would really love. And I just didn't really see where those comparisons came in. So if you can tell, I was underwhelmed by this book. It's probably not for me. Other people seem to enjoy it, and I just wish I knew what that hype was about because it definitely missed the mark here. And finally, let's talk about some backlist fantasy, and that is Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. And this is a piece of epic fantasy that follows a young boy who appears on the page to be neurodiverse and possibly has autism, just based off the representation you see on the page. And within the story, he is very talented with knot making, but he really struggles to fit in. He has one close friend, but otherwise is really bullied a lot. And so he's just kind of a misfit, a very shy, unconfident boy. One day, there is a man that comes to the town representing the Mages Guild, and he goes and is looking for an apprentice, and of course ends up taking this boy. He sees some potential in him, takes him off to go and train at this magic school. So first and foremost, if you know me and my taste, you know that I'm always looking for books with autism representation. It's just something near and dear to my heart now. And because of that, it's simply something that will always give a book bonus points. So I did love the representation, even though it perhaps wasn't quite perfect in my mind, but again, it's such a large spectrum that it's really a hard thing to criticize if the representation within the book fully matches my personal experience with it. I wish the young boy had been more confident. Perhaps it's realistic to see how frustratingly unconfident he is, but I would like to see him grow into that strong individual, which I suspect is where the author is going. In terms of the fantasy itself, I will be honest, this is very, very tropey. You have a chosen one going to magic school. I enjoy some of the tropes. Some of them are a little bit more tired, and again, I think I enjoyed them more because of the neurodiverse representation in the middle of the story. I did enjoy the magic system, which involves knot making, which fits in very well with the main character's obsession with knots, and I thought that that was well done. In terms of tone of the story, it was lighter than my personal preference. I don't expect every book to be grim dark, but I did find this one to be very light. I didn't worry as much as I should have for the well-being and health of the characters because I just felt like nothing bad was actually going to happen. So I wish the book had been a little bit darker just because I want to worry a bit. I want to wonder if they're going to be okay, and I feel like this author, while this book is marketed as adult, is kind of going for an all ages appeal, which I do see a lot with indie authors. They try to kind of catch everyone with their book, and so they try to make it safe for young adults, but technically still adult, so everyone reads it. And last, I always appreciate a book where it has dragons in the title and then actual dragons in the book, because so often fantasy books will reference dragons and then you go to read them and they actually have no monsters in them at all. I'll leave the details of that a little bit vague, but I'm definitely interested in continuing on with this series. It's not perfect for me, but it has a lot of potential, and again, depending on the development of the characters, the development of the plot, and how the tone and seriousness of the story progresses, I think I could really fall in love with this book and series depending on where it goes from here. All right, so that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I'd also love to hear about an author where you need to read more of their work in order to determine if they have potential to be a favorite author. And of course, what that book is. So if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of adult science fiction, fantasy, horror, thrillers, and true crime. If you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up, share it around online, drop a comment, even if just a little emoji. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye-bye.